My name is Colin Ashworth, 64 years old, a retired civil engineer from Kelowna, British Columbia, and I want to tell you about the morning I quietly transferred my CPP pension and my company retirement fund to a new account at a different financial institution, and what happened by dinner time that same evening. I had spent 38 years designing municipal water infrastructure across the Okanagan Valley. Bridges, drainage systems, culverts that still run clean under provincial highways, I now drive past without a second thought. I understood better than most men my age exactly how much invisible work it takes to keep something standing. I also understood, too late but not too late to act, exactly how quickly a foundation crumbles when the people living on top of it have been quietly drilling holes through the base for years. My wife Caroline passed away from ovarian cancer 3 winters ago. She was the kind of woman who kept a garden in August and laughed at the snow in January. When she died, the house in Kelowna felt like a structure that had lost its load-bearing wall. My daughter, we'll call her by her name, Vivienne, came to my side at the funeral with red eyes and warm hands, and 2 weeks later, she asked me to come live in the in-law suite attached to her house in West Kelowna, just across the bridge. She said I shouldn't be alone. She said she worried about me making the drive to the grocery store on icy roads. She said it would be good for the grandchildren to have me close. And then, almost as an afterthought, she asked if it would be easier if she'd just manage my accounts for a while. Just until I got back on my feet, just so I wouldn't have to think about it. I trusted my only child. I handed her the debit card attached to my direct deposit account. Between my CPP, my company pension from the engineering firm, and my OAS payments, that account received just over $6,000 every single month. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would review the statements when I felt more like myself. I never did, and Vivienne never once offered to show them to me. That changed on a Tuesday morning in October. I had woken up early and driven myself to the TD branch on Bernard Avenue to ask about a GIC renewal. The young woman at the counter pulled up my account and then went very quiet in the way that bank employees go quiet when something is wrong. She excused herself and came back with her branch manager. He sat across from me with the careful expression of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. He told me my account balance was $412. He showed me the statement going back 14 months. The withdrawals were consistent, frequent, and entirely unrecognizable to me. High-end furniture stores, a ski holiday in Whistler that I was not invited on, a Viking River cruise deposit I knew nothing about, monthly transfers to an account I had never opened. I sat in that branch chair for a long time after he finished speaking. I did not cry. I am not the crying kind. I am the kind of man who sits very still and runs load calculations in his head until the numbers stop lying to him. I drove home, made a coffee, and spent the next 4 hours on the phone with my financial institution setting up a completely new account at a completely separate bank. Simply financial, because there are no physical branches and no one in my family could walk in and charm a teller. I redirected every single incoming payment. CPP, company pension, OAS. All of it rerouted to a card that only I held, with a PIN that existed only in my head. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and waited. I did not wait long. My son-in-law's name is Forrest. He is 41 years old, sells commercial real estate in the Okanagan, drives a black BMW that is never not freshly washed, and speaks to me the way some men speak to contractors they've already decided not to pay. He arrived at the door of my in-law suite at 5:30 that evening without knocking. The door opened and he filled the frame with his shoulders, the way he always does. Deliberately, I've always thought. Like a man who learned early that physical space was a form of communication, he told me my account had been flagged. He used exactly that word, flagged, as though I had triggered some institutional malfunction rather than exercised a basic legal right over my own retirement savings. He said the transfers his wife managed on my behalf had bounced back. He said there had been an embarrassing situation at a furniture showroom in Kelowna, where their credit was declined mid-transaction, because they had assumed a specific deposit would clear that morning. He held out his hand, palm up, and told me he needed the new account information and the PIN number immediately so Vivienne could get the payment sorted before end of business. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I looked at his open hand, and then I told him I had no intention of giving him anything. The color that moved across his face was something I had never seen on the person before. He leaned his forearm against my doorframe, lowering his voice to the particular register men use when they want to be threatening without being technically threatening, and he told me that Vivienne had been managing my affairs out of love, and that this was the thanks she got. He told me I was confused. He told me that, frankly, at my age, I should be grateful someone was looking after things. I told him to come inside. I told him I had something to show him. He followed me to the small table in my living room, where I had laid out 14 months of printed bank statements, highlighted in 3 colors, yellow for grocery stores and pharmacies, the things my daughter had claimed she was buying for me, green for the actual purchases, cross-referenced with receipts I had requested from the bank, red for the transfers to the secondary account I had traced to a joint account held in both Vivienne and Forrest's names at a Scotiabank branch in downtown Kelowna. I told him that by my accounting, and I am a man who spent his career accounting for things, approximately $78,000 of my retirement income had been redirected over the previous 14 months into their household budget. Not to my groceries, not to my medications or my utilities, to their household, to the Viking cruise, to the Herman Miller chairs I had never sat in the dining room I was only occasionally invited to eat in. Forrest did not look at the statements for very long. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from me instead, and his posture changed completely. The physical dominance evaporated. What replaced it was something colder. He told me that he and Vivienne had been discussing my situation for quite some time. He said they had concerns. Serious ones. He said I'd been showing signs of cognitive decline, forgetting conversations, repeating stories, becoming irrationally suspicious of people who cared about me. He said they had been documenting these incidents. He said they had consulted a physician. He slid a folded letter across my table. It was typed on a letterhead I did not recognize from a clinic I'd never attended. It described a patient, my name, my date of birth, my provincial health number, as exhibiting moderate to severe early-onset dementia, functional impairment, and an inability to make sound financial decisions independently. It recommended an urgent application for adult guardianship under the British Columbia Adult Guardianship Act. Forrest told me that unless I cooperated, meaning unless I handed over the new account details and signed a general power of attorney transferring my financial authority back to Vivienne, he would file the guardianship application with the BC Supreme Court the following morning. He told me a judge would see my age, see the physician's letter, and would almost certainly grant an emergency interim order. Once that order was signed, my accounts would be frozen, my ability to make legal and financial decisions would be stripped away, and they would have the authority to move me out of the in-law suite and into a long-term care facility of their choosing. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and left. He took the physician's letter with him, but I had already photographed every word of it on my phone before he touched it. I sat in the quiet of my in-law suite and listened to the sound of their voices moving through the main house above me, muffled and intermittent, like a radio in another room. I was not afraid. Fear is what happens when you can't run the numbers. I had already begun running them. The fraudulent letter was the detail that clarified everything. Forrest did not manufacture a false dementia diagnosis because he was worried about me. He did it because $78,000 in redirected pension money is the kind of thing that becomes catastrophically visible the moment a lawyer looks at a bank statement. He needed legal authority over my affairs, not to protect me, but to bury the evidence of what they had already taken and continue taking without obstruction. I knew exactly one lawyer in Kelowna I trusted completely. His name is Vincent Calder. He is 67, semi-retired, cantankerous in the way of men who have won enough cases to stop pretending to be patient. And he has handled my estate planning since Caroline and I bought our first home in 1991. I called him at 7:30 that evening. He picked up on the third ring and said nothing when I finished explaining except, "Be here at 8 tomorrow morning. Don't sign a single thing tonight." I was at his office on Water Street at 8:05. He had already pulled my estate file and was on his second cup of coffee. I laid the photographed letter on his desk and the printed bank statements beside it. He read everything without interrupting me. Then he picked up his own phone and called his paralegal. While she ran background checks on the physician named on the fraudulent letterhead, Vincent pulled up the Provincial Adult Guardianship Act on his monitor and walked me through the exact sequence of events that would unfold if Forrest filed that application in the morning. An interim order could potentially be granted within 24 hours based solely on the affidavit of a physician, even one I had never met. Once interim guardianship was established, my new account could be frozen pending review. My ability to retain legal counsel could be challenged. The income I had just redirected could be redirected again legally by whoever held the order. Vincent looked at me over his reading glasses and told me we needed to move quickly on two fronts simultaneously. First, I needed to undergo an independent cognitive assessment, a formal, certified one, conducted by a registered neuropsychologist, the kind whose results would carry weight in BC Supreme Court. Second, he needed to know exactly who had signed that physician's letter and what relationship they had with Forrest. His paralegal knocked and entered before he finished the sentence. She placed a printed sheet on his desk. The clinic on the letterhead was registered, but had only 2 patients on file with the Provincial Health Authority, almost certainly a shell operation. The physician had a valid BC medical license but had faced a College of Physicians disciplinary review 3 years earlier for improper record keeping, and the clinic's registered business address shared a suite number with a numbered company whose sole director was a name neither Vincent nor I recognized, but which his paralegal had already cross-referenced against Forrest's LinkedIn profile. It was a former business associate, a man Forrest had co-signed a failed commercial lease with 5 years ago. Vincent underlined the name twice and told me we were no longer dealing with a family dispute over mismanaged finances. We were dealing with organized fraud involving a falsified medical document submitted to a court in British Columbia that is a criminal offence under Section 380 of the Criminal Code, compounded by the specific protections of the Adult Guardianship Act, which exists precisely to prevent predatory misuse of guardianship proceedings against vulnerable adults. He told me the cognitive assessment needed to happen that day. I spent 4 hours that afternoon at a private neuropsychology clinic in downtown Kelowna, whose assessments are accepted by the BC Supreme Court. The psychologist, a composed woman in her late 40s who gave nothing away in her expression, put me through processing speed tests, visuospatial reasoning, recall sequences, executive function batteries, and an extended clinical interview. She did not tell me how I was doing. She said she never did. I will tell you what I told her when she asked me to describe my professional background. I told her I had spent 38 years calculating the tensile strength of infrastructure under dynamic load conditions. I told her that structural failure is almost never the result of a single catastrophic event. It is almost always the result of small, consistent stresses accumulating invisibly over time in places no one bothered to inspect. She wrote something down and moved on. The results came back the following morning. I scored in the 94th percentile for executive function. My recall was assessed as above average for my age cohort. The clinical summary stated clearly and unambiguously that I showed no indicators of cognitive impairment, no evidence of functional decline, and was entirely competent to manage my personal, financial, and legal affairs independently. The psychologist signed it. Her clinic director co-signed it. It was stamped with the clinic certification seal. Vincent called me before I had finished reading it. He told me to come back to his office immediately. Something had happened overnight. When I walked through his door, he turned his monitor to face me. He had been running a title search on the property where Vivienne and Forrest lived. The house was a 4-bedroom, 2-story home in West Kelowna's Lakeview Heights neighborhood. I had not purchased that house for them. But I had co-signed the original mortgage 11 years ago when Forrest's income was inconsistent and the bank wanted a secondary guarantor on the loan. I had since been removed from the mortgage, or so I believed. Vincent pointed to a registered lien recorded against the property title 8 weeks ago. It was a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, in the amount of $220,000, advanced against the current appraised value of the home. The application had been submitted jointly. One name was Forrest's. The other name was mine. My name. On a document I had never seen. The signature on the application. I could see it clearly in the scanned copy Vincent pulled from the Land, Title and Survey Authority database. Was not my handwriting. I have exceptionally legible block printing and a specific way of forming the capital A in Ashworth that takes a particular angle. What appeared on that document was a fluid, hurried cursive that bore only a passing resemblance to my name. Someone had signed as me. Someone who had access to older documents with my genuine signature as a reference point. Someone who lived in the same property used as collateral for the loan. $220,000 of equity borrowed against a home I had partially guaranteed using a signature I had not written. Vincent did not express surprise. He sat back in his chair and told me the full picture had just become federal. Mortgage fraud in Canada. Falsifying a signature on a financial instrument to obtain credit falls under Section 380 of the Criminal Code and carries a maximum sentence of 14 years. The HELOC lender, a Schedule A chartered bank, had been defrauded. The Land Title Authority had a forged document in its registry, and the same man who was planning to file a guardianship application based on a fraudulent medical certificate had also forged my signature to borrow against property I was connected to. He picked up his phone and called the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. The next morning, I sat across from two plainclothes RCMP officers in Vincent's boardroom. I did not present myself as an upset father. I presented myself as a witness providing a precise chronological account of documented events. I had the bank statements. I had the photographed fraudulent medical letter. I had the title search showing the forged HELOC application. I had the certified neuropsychology report. I had a paper trail assembled with the same methodical attention to detail I had once applied to engineering specifications. One of the officers, a woman who took notes in a very small, very precise hand, told me before she left that she had rarely seen a fraud file arrive this organized. I thanked her and said nothing else. Forrest filed the guardianship application at the BC Supreme Court Registry in Kelowna at 9:45 that morning. I know the exact time because Vincent had a contact at the registry who sent him a text message the moment it appeared in the system. Forrest walked in believing he was about to bury me under a court order. He did not know that the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit was already executing a search warrant on his home office and the associated numbered company's registered address. He did not know that his bank had received a formal police hold request on the HELOC account, and he did not know that Vincent was already filing the application to have the guardianship proceeding dismissed on the grounds of fraudulent evidence. He found out over the next 6 hours. I was in Vincent's office when my phone rang. It was Vivienne. I knew it would be. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. She did not lead with anger this time. The voice on the other end of the line was the voice I remembered from the weeks after her mother's funeral. Thin, shaking slightly, a sound like something under too much pressure. She said Forrest had been taken in for questioning. She said the police had taken his computer and his files. She said the bank had frozen their joint accounts. She asked me what was happening. I told her I thought she probably understood what was happening. She began to cry, the real kind, not the performance. She said she didn't know about the HELOC. She said Forrest had handled all their finances, and she had signed things without reading them. And she didn't know. And maybe that was partially true. It did not matter very much at that point. What I knew for certain was that she had known about the redirected pension. She had been the one managing my account. She had been the one making the withdrawals. She had called me confused and forgetful to my face in the weeks before Forrest presented that letter. Planting the story, I realize now, for anyone who might later be called as a witness. I told her to retain a lawyer. I told her to tell that lawyer the truth, because the RCMP would find the truth regardless, and it was considerably better to cooperate than to obstruct. I told her I loved her, and then I told her I could not help her, and I ended the call. What I felt in the silence after was not satisfaction. It was something closer to grief, if grief can coexist with absolute clarity. I had built a life around the assumption that the love I put into something made it structurally sound. I was wrong about that. Love is not a load-bearing material. It can be present in every corner of a structure and still not prevent a collapse if the occupants have been quietly removing the bolts. The guardianship application was dismissed within 48 hours. The presiding judge reviewed the certified neuropsychological assessment, noted the active RCMP fraud investigation into the submitting parties, and dismissed the proceeding with prejudice, meaning it could not be refiled. The fraudulent physician's letter was entered as evidence in the criminal investigation. The Hillock lender moved quickly once the forged signature was confirmed by a forensic document examiner retained by the bank. The fraudulent credit line was cancelled. The bank recovered its exposure from Forrest's frozen personal assets. The title lien was removed. Forrest was charged 6 weeks later. Fraud over $5,000 under Section 380, forgery under Section 366, uttering a forged document under Section 368. His lawyer negotiated for months. It didn't matter. The document examiner's report was meticulous. The paper trail was unambiguous. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts in a provincial court proceeding and received a sentence of 22 months in a federal corrections facility, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. He will never hold a real estate license in British Columbia again. Vivian was charged separately with fraud over $5,000 related to the redirected pension funds. She cooperated fully with the Crown. She received a conditional sentence. No custody time, but 2 years of strict supervised conditions, community service, and a full restitution order for the $78,000. She is paying it back in monthly amounts that I am told have significantly altered her standard of living. I have not spoken to her since the phone call in Vincent's office. I do not know if I will. There is a version of this story where the father forgives the daughter, and I have spent a considerable number of evenings on my back porch, turning that version over in my mind, the way you turn a stone to see what's underneath. I am not certain that forgiveness requires contact. I am not certain that love requires proximity. What I know is that I am not interested in rebuilding a structure on a foundation I know to be compromised. I learned that from 38 years of engineering. You do not patch a cracked footing and hope for the best. You excavate it entirely, pour new concrete, and build something different on top. I sold the in-law suite property, the entire lot, in the spring. I had owned it outright. The proceeds, combined with my recovered pension and the money that had never been touched in my long-term investment accounts, left me in a position I had not fully understood myself to be in until Vincent laid out the complete picture. I was comfortable. More than comfortable. I had simply not been paying attention. I used part of the sale proceeds to do something Caroline and I had talked about for our retirement and never managed. I booked a slow, extended trip, not a cruise, not a tour group, not anything with a schedule. I rented a small house in Prince Edward Island for 3 months in the summer, a century-old wood-frame cottage outside Charlottetown, with a wraparound porch and a garden that needed attention and a view of the Northumberland Strait that changed color every hour, depending on the light. I drove there, 4,800 kilometers across the country alone, with the windows down through the Shield and the St. Lawrence and the Maritimes. I stopped whenever I wanted. I ate at roadside diners and called old colleagues from the engineering firm and slept well every night for the first time in 3 years on the porch of that cottage on a Tuesday evening in July, with a glass of Prince Edward Island red from a local vineyard, and the sound of the water moving below the bluffs. I thought about something I used to tell junior engineers when I was training them. The strongest structures are not the ones with the most material. They are the ones that understand their own load limits and refuse to carry more than they were designed to bear. I had been carrying weight that did not belong to me for years. Weight I mistook for love, for family obligation, for the normal cost of being a father. I was wrong about that too. I am 64 years old. My pension arrives on schedule every month into an account that only I access. My estate is intact and properly documented. I have a good lawyer, a warm porch, and more road left than I probably deserve. I wake up in the morning, and I do not owe anyone an explanation for how I choose to spend my own retirement. That is not a small thing. I understand that now. It took losing almost everything to understand it, but I do understand it, cleanly and without ambiguity, the way you understand a thing when you've done the engineering yourself. If you have spent your life building something for the people you love, you deserve to benefit from what you built. You are not a resource. You are not a backup account. And the day you decide to stop being treated like one is not a betrayal of your family. It is the most honest thing you will ever do for yourself. I keep coming back to the moment I sat in that TD branch chair, looking at 14 months of statements that told a story I had refused to see. Not because the evidence wasn't there. It was always there. I kept coming back because I think there's a particular kind of blindness that comes from loving someone. A willingness to interpret every red flag as a misunderstanding, every warning sign as something you've probably misread. I did that for over a year. I told myself Vivienne was managing things. I told myself she was tired and busy and doing her best. The truth is, I didn't look because I didn't want to find what I found. That's the part I have to be honest about. What happened to me wasn't only Forrest's doing. It required my own quiet cooperation. I handed over access to my life savings to avoid the discomfort of confronting my grief, and someone who should have protected that trust decided instead to exploit it. I understand now that goodness in a relationship, real decency, isn't just about intention. It's about what you actually do when no one is watching, when the other person is too broken to audit the books. Vivienne and Forrest failed that test completely. But I also failed myself by not building in the safeguards that basic self-respect requires. What saved me in the end wasn't luck. It was 38 years of training myself to think clearly under pressure. When I sat in Vincent's office and the full picture came into view, the fraudulent medical letter, the forged HELOC signature, the redirected pension, I didn't fall apart. I ran the numbers. I asked the right questions. I followed the evidence to the next logical step and then the next. That discipline, the habit of thinking rather than reacting, of building a case before you make a move, is something I developed over decades of engineering work. It turned out to be the most useful thing I owned. I think about Forrest in that correctional facility sometimes, and I don't feel what I expected to feel. There's no satisfaction in it. What strikes me is the wastefulness of it all. He was a capable man who built an entire architecture of deception rather than simply living within his means. The energy he put into forging documents, bribing a physician, constructing a false narrative about my cognitive decline, that same energy, directed honestly, could have built something real. Instead, he built a structure on fraudulent footings, and it collapsed exactly the way fraudulent structures always do, loudly, suddenly, and with significant damage to everyone nearby. If you are carrying weight that was never yours to carry, I want you to hear this clearly. Recognizing that fact is not selfishness. It is not a failure of love. It is the first honest thing you can do for yourself. And, sometimes, for the person who put it there. The hardest part of what I went through was not the RCMP interviews or the court proceedings or even the silence that followed the last phone call with my daughter. The hardest part was accepting that I had confused endurance with loyalty for a very long time. They are not the same thing. Standing on that porch in Prince Edward Island with the strait moving below me, I understood something I couldn't have understood while I was still in the middle of it. The life you build for yourself, carefully, honestly, with your own hands and your own income and your own clear mind, is the only foundation that holds. Everything else is borrowed weight. And borrowed weight eventually always comes due.